Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this amazing webinar that we've got lined up for you guys, which will be a discussion about men, masculinities and gender equality. My name is Majid, former MEP and Mayor of Sheffield and currently Director of Union of Justice. And I've got the great privilege of being able to moderate this event today. So gender-based violence is, as we know, prevalent throughout society. It impacts social, economic and psychological well-beings of individuals as well as our communities. And sadly, violence against women and girls in particular is usually underreported. It's also kind of really worth highlighting that this devastating menace has seriously worsened during the COVID-19 lockdown measures, which has been creating what as many people have referred to as the hidden pandemic. The reality is ending violence in our communities is a responsibility of the entire community, and it's significant that men and boys are active participants and promoters of change to get rid of the current status quo. And on the same scale, it's also critical to combat not only the individual instances of violence, but also the systemic forms of violence, as violence does not simply occur in a vacuum, but rather in a society that really encourages it and condones it, unfortunately. Evidence from researchers has proved that working with men and boys to challenge toxic masculinity and gender inequality has a positive impact in improving the health and well-being of women and children, as well as men themselves. And in the effort to include men as part of the solution to ending violence against women, we have to encourage active involvement of men and boys in eliminating gender stereotypes, designs, and supporting them to take an active role in the prevention and elimination of gender-based violence. The involvement of men in ending violence against women and promoting gender equality varies and can be described as diverse interventions on a continuum. And in order to achieve gender justice, it is really essential that we are all part of the solution as actors, as allies, defenders of women's rights and gender equality. And at Greens Ether, and they're really doing a brilliant, amazing job in advocating for a culture of masculinity that really celebrates gender in their diversity and actively dismantles obstacles in the way of equality and justice. We are going to be exploring all this and so much more in this event, while we try and answer the question of what is the role in men in achieving equality and in eradicating gender-based violence in the European Union. I'm really privileged to be joined by some amazing people on the panel today. We've got Alan Ali, who's president of MAN. We've got Jonas Ham, who's a policy officer from Transgender Europe. We've also got Anbid Zaman, LGBTIQ plus activist, ILGA World Youth Steering Committee representative in Europe and Central Asia. And we've also got the wonderful MEP Pa, who will be joining us today, who's here today, and will also be giving us some closing words at the end. So welcome, guys. It's a real honor and privilege to be hosting you today. So I know we're going to be getting into quite a lot today, but just to kind of kick things off, I'd like to ask you a question, Alan. And as you know, Alan, outdated norms in society force men into a very limiting masculine role. How do you think these strict norms affect the freedoms and rights of people of all genders?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this seminar. It's going to be wonderful to listen to all of the participants, and thank you for your question. I think the norms, the normative norms of how to be a man, to be like toxic masculinity. It's first of all, it prevents men to be themselves, men and boys. We have to fit in so-called a man box. We are not allowed to show vulnerability. You're not allowed to, to express yourself freely. Although, like all the time, you need to always fit in with the norms regarding and how to be. And you're not allowed to cry. You might be allowed to cry if, for example, during a football match, a soccer match, when you are in rage. But like to be vulnerable, to feel, feel sorry for yourself or to be sad, that type of feelings is not allowed to show. So that limits you in many ways, and also limits you how to in your relationship, in how to express your feelings, and also to dig in other people's feelings. And in that regard, also it limits the people surrounding you. They cannot express themselves around you because they always have to adapt to what you as a man can be and how you behave. And also, there's always a heteronormative norm to fit into, and also to some kind of uphold. So like everything that actually in somehow breaks towards the heteronormative norms, they are not allowed. So it limits the environment that surrounds you, but also the people that you interact with, and also in how to deal with the problems, with challenges. And for example, unfortunately, that violence will be a tool of solving problems. So there will be quick fixes, but in the long term, they always end in disaster. So there are a lot of ways in how to see that you can see that the notion on how to be a man, not really what is to be a man, like the norms regarding that also limits us and our surroundings and how to be and how to interact with each other and so on. So and also that leads to a lot of um, destructive patterns that we follow. So you cannot in relationships you cannot deal with the relationships, and it can end up in a violent behavior. It can also limit you on how you perceive yourself. Like, okay, in the case of domestic work, I'm not taking responsibility for domestic work. I'm not taking care of my children, to change diapers or to help cleaning the home and so on, because those are not manly thing to do. So you're not participating in your home environment. So what we do within organization Man, we try to have a different type of group and actions towards to teach men to reveal like how does toxic masculinity limit us, but what can we do to change it, because that's the main thing. We can always talk about the problems and the limitation of toxic masculinity, but what's more interesting, like how can we change it? Because change is possible. We all have the opportunity to change. First of all, we need to reflect on our actions and what do we know about ourselves, what do we know about our environment, and how can we change these norms, because it's totally possible. We have like groups for paternity groups for fathers, and then we have amazing results. Like you can see that a lot of the partners, the female partners in our how they in their views, they say like, I sent my husband to a man group to talk about paternity. What I got back, I got a loving partner and a loving father to take care of the children and also helps in the domestic. And so everybody benefits from the change of toxic masculinity.
No, you definitely speak so much truth there, and that we all kind of really benefit from it. I guess, as you touched on, one of the difficult things is that it's just so steeped within society, even whether that be from other men, from our own families, through advertising, but it's trying to restructure how society, what men's place is within society. So thank you so much, and for sharing your thoughts on that. If I can just go to you, and Jonas, I just love to know, in terms of like, what do you think is impact? Like, what is the impact of these outdated norms on gender-based violence?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here to speak today. I have to say, when you did reach out, I was like, oh, why do they want to talk to me? Oh yeah, because they think I'm a man. And that led me to think myself, to ask myself, am I a man? Because I represent transgender Europe. I'm 35 years old, and for the largest part of my life, I have not identified as a man. As a matter of fact, I have identified as a female for the first 20 years, and as a mostly non-binary gender fluid person for the next 15. And there are instances in between where I identify as a man. And I reflect on myself, and I'm like, yes, that's me. And then a couple of weeks later, I ask the same question again, and I'm like, no, that's not me. I'm not a man. What are you talking about? So I thought about maybe that's not the right question to ask here, actually. So maybe the right questions that I need to ask myself, or that we need to ask ourselves, is, am I a person dedicated to fight gender-based violence? Yes. Am I a person representing an organization that is dedicated to fight gender-based violence? Yes, absolutely. Am I a feminist? Yes. Do I experience male privilege? Yes, absolutely. Do I have experience of sexism in my life that helps me understand the really lived-in effects of the patriarchy? And do I know that system from both sides? Yes, absolutely. Do I have a responsibility to use my male privilege in order to fight gender-based violence, to fight the patriarchy, and to educate and struggle for a better and free society where gender-based violence is not happening anymore? Yes, absolutely. And I think I would say that especially I have a responsibility to use the privilege that I enjoy and that maybe helps me to be in the place where I am in the first place, to use that privilege to support especially my trans sisters and my trans non-binary siblings who don't enjoy the same privilege that I do, simply because I am being seen as a man. Because that is something that I've realized is very true. When I transitioned like 10 years ago, suddenly there was no sexism anymore. And suddenly I was being valued and my opinion was taken seriously. And there were lesser things asked of me simply because I simply had passing as a man. So that is something that I just wanted to point out here. And the reason why I go into so much detail on that is because I think that not only do we have to reflect on gender norms in itself, but actually gender in itself has become more fluid in the past 20 years. And yes, Judith Butler was right in a way. And I think we really need to maybe stop asking less the question, what is a man and what is a woman, but rather how can we work towards a society that includes everyone, and also reflect that gender-based violence does not only affect women and girls, but it does affect non-binary people, it does affect men, it does affect trans men and trans women, who are of course part of the trans women being of course part of the women's group, but often excluded out of that. And that is essentially because of our essential ideas of gender. And that is where I come back to the link of how do outdated norms impact gender-based violence. Because of course we're talking about the patriarchy here, and about a system that creates a hierarchy, and it creates strict borders, it creates categories, and it creates strict borders between those categories. And people who cross those categories, either by, for example, trans people transitioning, or simply because, or simply cis people who do not fully conform to the norms that are being put on them, they are being punished for that. So maybe to finally give an answer to your question and make it very short, I think without gender norms, without outdated gender norms, we would barely have gender-based violence. We would still have violence, but not that much based on gender.
No, totally understand. And especially, I guess, in a lot of the language that's used in regarding gender-based violence, it can be seen as a bit binary of just male and female, and you just touched upon the fact that of course there's a lot of gender fluidity. So how can organizations, activists, groups, what can they do to ensure that when campaigning or even just trying to fight gender-based violence, that they're not excluding certain groups and that it is more inclusive?
I think one is actually to use a term like gender-based violence and domestic violence, and not, for example, a term like violence against women or violence against women and girls, because here we already have that broader concept of gender that is more inclusive and tries to encompass everyone. So that is one thing. And then I would say, how can organizations support that process? Just really like have that, bring gender-based violence to your attention time and again. Read the studies that come out, reflect on them, make sure that you're intersectional in your work, which probably touches upon the next subject that we're going to have. And just really always keep in mind, gender-based violence is not just violence against women and girls. It is based in a system that oppresses everyone, but affects some groups structurally more than others.
No, totally. Thank you so much. Anbid, I guess what I'd love to ask you is, why do you think it's important to understand the links between, say, like white supremacy, the patriarchy, and other systems of oppression and power when talking about gender-based violence?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And just want to acknowledge what Jonas said, that language matters and it has a big impact, and gender is just so stressful thing. So yeah, I don't mind people being in binary or non-binary. I think everyone has a free will, and you can actually yeah, you can actually put yourself in a society knowing that being a man, you have some disadvantages, and also being a woman, you have some as well. I think it's very important to acknowledge that culture plays a big role in creating violence in our lives, and which hinders peace, positive peace. And it's set of ideas, values, which also somehow comes from religion, science, art, and culture to create the structures we live in, which is quite violent in many ways. And the understanding of violence is just really comes to the point to someone being punched and someone being discriminated. But there is just more to that. And I think it is important to, of course, interconnect the relation between violences created by white supremacy or masculinity, or the idea that we are different. You know, the thing is about when people thought about naturally men were more capable of doing things, or white people were more intelligent, that encouraged the idea that Black or people of color could be traded as objects, or women. I come from Indian subcontinent. Harsh reality of life that people have to experience in Bangladesh, in India, was you were technically, in a way, you were owned by your husband, and when your partner dies, then you will be cremated together, alive with that person. And Raja Ram Mohan Rai actually worked towards it to stop it, and that's actually was supported by the culture. And if we talk about, unfortunately, some of my family members who actually moved out from Denmark back to Bangladesh only because they wanted to enjoy the violence against their wife or their children. So it is important to acknowledge that has a lot to do with culture, our values, and how we think. Why interlinking other societal oppressions when we talk about gender-based violence? Because I think it is important to acknowledge that not all women or not all gender diverse people are same. When I say women, I would like to also acknowledge that there are women who could bodily be as a male person, but women is a gender identity, gender is a social construct, and people who identify as women, they are women. And I think it's important that we acknowledge them as well in our movements, in our organizations, and in our programs and policies we take. So why it's important to interconnect? Because not all women are same. Not all women have same backgrounds, identities. A Black woman is perceived in society differently than a white woman. And that's when we talk about privileges. A woman with higher income and lower income. So a woman being able with disability, they are perceived differently and have different benefits. And our structure is created in a way that some people have access to services, some people have access to certain rights and freedom because they are positioned in a society, willingly or not willingly, to enjoy certain freedom, rights, and benefits, which has to do with culture, as I say, history of white supremacy, history of masculinity or patriarchy being a great, how do you call it, a great status, being men. And I would say, I, as a person of color, migrant in Germany, often people, like my father was actually asking me on the phone, do you have to be effeminate to be gay? And I said, no, I don't have to be effeminate to be gay. Then why do you wear dresses? Because I like them, you know? And so the understanding of gender is also very important in this context. I think I'm kind of talking a lot. I would like to give the floor back to you, Majid.
Not at all. You do it really, and you're adding a lot of value to the discussion. So thank you very much. And I think you're right in terms of like white supremacy, patriarchy. They're all just the root evils of so many injustices across society that we need to kind of tackle. I'd like to, first of all, just say to everyone that's tuned in and watching, thank you for joining us. Please do engage if you got any questions. If you'd like to tweet and wherever it is, just do engage with us and feel free to ask some questions as well. I guess this is a question kind of thing just to anybody, really. I just like to really focus on some solutions, some possible ways that we can kind of tackle this. So like what is to be done basically across the EU and across the European Union to actually challenge these outdated norms of masculinity. I know it's that the EU alone isn't going to solve the issue. Like, it's for all of us and for every facet of society to really kind of tackle this, because it is a collective fight. But I guess, what do you think the European Union, as an institution or as EU organizations or whatever, what do you think are some of the solutions? Anybody would like to go first? Jonas.
I could just present some very first ideas, and
please.
I think this is not something that you can sort of tackle on an EU level in that sense. Like, you cannot, let's say, make an EU directive that will solve gender norms. You can make an EU directive against gender-based violence, of course, but this change has to happen at the bottom. It has to happen at the people's level. You need places like the man paternity group that somebody has been mentioning earlier, and you need a lot of that. And you can of course support that through campaigns, image campaigns. You can do EU funding programs that tackle specifically gender norms and create funding for organizations working at the bottom, working with the people. But you will need a lot of that, and it probably will take some more time. Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't also look at EU directives against gender-based violence and the Eurocrimes extension and hate crime legislation and so forth.
No, thank you very much. And Alan, as well, I'd love to kind of hear in terms of, I guess, within your own organization, have you come across any other organizations where men are taking like men-led initiatives to actually tackle gender-based violence at all?
Thank you. My connection is a little bit bad, so I haven't heard all the conversation, but I kind of get a picture of it. So I try to answer, and if it's incorrect, you can
Fine.
guide me. Well, I think that one of the remedies for change is actually some kind of enlightenment and awareness. We need to make men more aware of their own actions, of how where we stand, and our actions, what we do, what kind of effect does it have, or consequences does it have on myself, but also on my environment that I am in. We need to also ask. We should stop dividing men into good men and bad men. Like for many people, it's like I'm kind of the good man, because I'm a feminist. I have worked with this for more than 20 years, but I'm not a good man. I'm just a man like any other man. But the only difference is that I had help. My sister, my female friends, they pushed me forward. They created awareness within me, and I had the opportunity and to take a stand against men's toxic masculinity and for gender equality. So we need more men to be with us, to believe in the change, and in order to do that, we need to create a larger awareness. And also, we need to to start that. We need to somehow. I've just written down here. I just lost my flow here. Now, it's also very important to give men tools on how to do it. Because we don't. Of course, it would be wonderful to create some kind of a revolution. And this is somehow, I think it's always almost happening. And because in Sweden, just last month, we had 5 women who got killed within the time, like the timetable of 2 weeks, and it creates a rage within men. Say okay, it's important now. Stop the violence, but then we need men to take action. We can, and also not passive action. We cannot just sign up on a newsletter, say okay, I am against violence against women, but no, we need to do more. So what we create in men, we try to mobilize other men. So we have groups where we meet and where we talk, but we're not talking about on a structural level, on this large problems, because then we're talking about the other people, but we're talking about ourselves. Start with yourselves. What are your experiences of toxic masculinity, of this, on catcalling or oppressing women, or being, oppressed ourselves, because we oppress each other as men. So starting from that, then we create a level of awareness that maybe the one haven't been there before. And we see that the most participants that they try this for the first time in our groups, they are most likely to continue in other group talks and continuing. So this is very important. But also on EU level, we need to also have male politicians to actually stand up for this. Okay, because if male politicians stand up for this, then we also as men can demand of them what to do. But if we don't if you don't have any male role models within the politics, but the majority, there are women are actually fighting for these rights. We have the people from the LGBT community fighting for these rights, but we have very few cis normative men that are actually fighting for these issues. So that's what we need to do. And also we need a lot of funding, because the civil society need funding to do what they are best at, to mobilize the society. And the politicians, they have the means to give us fundings, because if it's like to run a company. When you work within civil society, first you have the demand and the supply you have to meet, but also at the same time you need to create getting the fundings. And that's a large problem. You see the shelter organization, female shelter organization, we have the shelter organization for LGBTQI+, and so on. They are struggling. They are on their knees. They cannot do more volunteer work, because there where we need the politics to dive in and give us the funding, and then we will do most of the work.
No, totally understand. And I think you really touched up on quite a few good points. One of them being, we need to kind of firstly start off with ourselves. I know you said that you do a couple of initiatives with your organizations where you get a group of men together and you basically just discuss in terms of what can we do. But does that go further in terms, because I know one of the things that I want to basically just touch upon is looking at prevention and education. So it's like, What role do you think, Alan, education, especially would that be young men, has in terms of battling those toxic masculinity tropes? Because it's one thing, like we can be one of the difficult things about it because we're up against so much, whether that be just society in general, whether that be media, culture, sports, whatever, film, music. It's just so inherent within society. How important is education and to basically help prevent gender-based violence?
I think it's very important, and it's important on different levels. I think it's crucial to have to introduce it in at the early stage in school, in primary school, and so on. It's really important there, because then there you create the norms that are actually wider and broader, and also you create some kind of a resistance against using, for example, violence, using to have using homophobic slurs and so on. So that there is very important to start. But at the same time, we need to also work with the parents, and that we can do throughout the the workplaces, the job centers, at higher education. So we should not forget the adults, because a lot of the time we think like, okay, well, let's do this. The kids, they are the future. But what are we doing with the ones that are actually carriers of these norms? And they are setting the bars on how to act and react and to behave. This is very important to have on those levels. And also we need it, within the structural level, so within the municipalities. So we should start from the mayor to the janitor, So we need to start. Education is needed in many different levels. And also, last but not least, we need to have politicians that are actually, they know they know how to navigate through these deep waters, because it's not so easy many times. So you need to know what to do and how to do it, but also you need to keep these to fight for these rights parallel to your own the other agendas that you are running as a politician. So you need to have some kind of a, when you study gender studies, when I studied when I was 20 years old, like, oh my God, 25 years ago, then my professor said, like, she said, like, Alan, you know what? You're a good kid, but you need to put your gender analysis glasses on, so you can see through that. Then you will understand gender, race, and etc. And our politicians, they need to have those glasses on all the time when they are at the office, because they need to know that this is a parallel process. You cannot just leave it to a couple of few politicians to run these issues, because then we are doomed, because then the changes will not come that quickly. So
no, thank you very much. And you're right, we have to use our privilege, and I think your comment's definitely being heard by our resident politician today, Pa, who I'm sure will kind of be feeding back his comments and at the end. If I can just go to you and Anbid for a moment. And of course, you've been hearing what everyone's been discussing, but one thing I'd love to kind of hear from you is, I guess, the role that organizations like the ILG, the organization that you're with, role that they play. And of course, it's organizations like yourself that are on the grassroots, that are basically engaged with these communities. So what is your relationship with institutions in trying to tackle gender-based violence?
I would respond to your question first, and also I would like to echo what other speakers have been saying. I think it's really important that we give a lot of support to organizations, grassroots organizations, because that's where the change will start, as Jonas pointed out as well. I represent ILGA Europe and Central Asian region, 600 plus organizations. And if you look at the organizations, there is decreasing funds available and resources available for social programming and also campaigning for LGBTI human rights, which include many intersections of people in the community. It's very diverse, and all communities are diverse. And there, I think we need more social investment, and more social investment in a sense that not just from the government, but also from private enterprise, corporations, and individuals who have a lot of resources that they can offer. A good practice I would like to mention from ILGA world structure is that we have like at the core of the idea of having intersectional steering committees was to really focus on issues relates to like subgroups of LGBTI community, which are uniquely special and dynamic. We have 5 steering committees, one of them being youth, where I represent Europe region. There are intersectional steering committees such as women, bisexual, intersex, and trans. There is no committee for men, but there is for youth, where we also discuss about issues faced by men, and also like there are trans men as well. So I think we have an exchange, and we have representation from 6 regions all around the world. It is enriching because we also get the perspective of how lives are over there, and when we compare it, or when we kind of think about it, the struggle is very similar, even though we are privileged with a lot of resources in European Union. And I think the question you asked previously about what European Union could do, I think European Union cannot afford it to change society in Europe. It's too expensive and it's too time consuming. We as citizens have to contribute. Corporations, private sector has to contribute, make social investments. And it should actually start very at the root, where a child is starting to be socialized, not just school with education, but also churches, religious institutions, parents, families. They need resources and support. They need toolkits that they can actually know how to do gender neutral parenting, how to make decisions for their children, which will shape not just their lives, but also shape society. Often we have a lot of expectations from politicians, but also we need to understand they are representatives of different regions. So they will represent the values and culture and ideas of the region they're representing. So we cannot really put a lot of pressure on them, but really work with their region and support them how they can bring positive change for the whole. I think I answered your question.
No,
Thanks.
brilliant. Handsome. Thank you very much. Jonas, did you want to comment on anything that's been said so far at all?
First of all, that I can just say yes to everything the other panelists have said. I was thinking about. I wrote a sentence down at some point, and that is that. We need to create an understanding that men have created the problem, and that is also why we have, me including myself and the group of men here, the responsibility to solve it. And it does affect 100% of society, so we need everyone to solve it, not just the few politicians who work on it. I think that I wrote that down in when Alan spoke about that we need that gender politics cannot be on the shoulders of women politicians only. So apart from that, no, I'd like to echo what Anbit said about we need the change in society, and yes, politicians are very much a representative of the values of the people that select them. So yeah, we need to create change by changing attitudes.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that Ambi touched upon is the role that other societal structures have, like priests, imams, just all these religion, because religion plays a big role in it as well. They've got big parts. Football clubs, any and every institution has got a role that they can do to actually tackle gender-based violence. Because as I think has been echoed by everyone. Go on, Ambit.
I think it all comes to the point where we need to embrace and empower people to claim freedom. And when you see a structural violence, to really defend your rights and be ready always to confront structures and people, and be aware of your privileges of being men or whatever. So when you experience your privilege and you see the other person doesn't get it, in terms of benefits, discrimination, or all of that, then you can actually take a step back and let the other person know that what that person did was actually something wrong, And that's how we actually need to create a culture where we really claim our freedom. Thank you.
So just, I'll get to you guys. So just on the back of that, and you mentioned that people kind of need to stand up, basically, right? But the thing is, a lot of people may not have the courage to actually stand up and kind of like, even though they may want to. So what's, I'll go to Alan and Jonas in terms of, but just, and to give you an opportunity to also say comments, but what can individuals that be like, yeah, I know this is happening, but or they just haven't got the courage to kind of do it at all? And Alan, I know you had your hand up raised earlier. Did you want to come in or?
Yeah, I had a short comment about inviting religious, like the church or the mosque, or I had a great example from I participated at CSW, Commission on Status of Women, this year, and there was a perfect example from a female judge in Palestine who actually joined one of the churches there, and she led, she convinced the church to change the family laws within that church, and this has been so successful that the other churches, they're looking to this church and asking like, so how did you created those changes? We also want to do that. So what I'm saying, like, that can be also an opportunity. It's important to invite the religious groups in, because they have the power to change. The question is how. But where there is a how, then the other can, follow it. And it's also the same thing with the last question you asked, like, how can we make
Oh, bless him. He's frozen. Okay.
Do you guys hear me?
Yeah, sorry. Can you repeat your sentence again? Hello? We can see you're moving now. You're back on. Just want to repeat your point again, Alan? No, I don't think he can hear us. Not to worry. We'll come back to you, Alan. And just to kind of touch upon what Alan was saying was, like, religious organizations have got a big role to do it. And I think if you look within all religious kind of groups, they all espouse equality, love, and treating each other well kind of thing. So I think I see his point. Jonas, you also had a point. Saw your hand raised earlier on.
Yeah, it was connected to something Anbit said, but also to then you posed the question of how can we overcome that fear. And I think to all my fellow men out here, I would say, be bold, try it, and try it out in little ways. Do overcome the fear. Try like oftentimes the norms we have in our heads are so much stronger and so much stricter, and we judge ourselves so much more harshly than the society around us actually does, because we already have that we already have it in our head. And before I worked where I work now in Transgender Europe, I was actually a counselor in a trans counseling place, and I was talking to trans people mostly when they were coming out. And there always you had that fear of, oh my God, what is going to happen to me if I start crossing these gender norms? And most of the time, nothing happens. And you realize there is a freedom out there if you just dare to grasp it. I need to put that into perspective, of course, because I live and work in Berlin, and that is a very special place. And of course, I am white, and most of the people that I worked with were white. So, and there, of course, are the dangers involved for people with more marginalizations. But at the same time, I would encourage everyone, do try out how much the system around you allows you, and slowly expand on that borders. Like, don't limit yourself by the scissor in your own head, we say in German. I don't know if that translates into English.
It doesn't as much, but we get the gist. Don't worry, we get the gist. And Alan, sorry, you're back.
Yes, I'm back. I'm sorry about that. Well, anyway, so for the last question you asked on how to collect courage to speak up. I think you don't need to have a confrontative method, to somehow push people towards the wall and say like, what are you saying? You're a bad person or that's wrong. I think for most of my time working with these issues, I actually ask a simple question: just what do you mean by that? So how is that, for example, I had a student, and he asked about, he was telling me a story about a guy at his former boss, that he actually didn't give him his paycheck on time. And then he said like, oh, and he used a homophobic slur to address the man, to describe the man. And I asked like, so how did you know that he was gay? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, but you said like that. He's like, no, he's not gay. But what does his sexuality has to do with that? With that he didn't give you a paycheck? And he said, no, but he was a stupid man. And I said, okay, I can understand. But why do you call him gay slurs? And then he said, no, are you pulling my leg? He said. I said, no, I'm not pulling your leg. I'm just asking you about how is this relevant, And then 10 years later, I met him, and he was working at the youth center, and he used the same method to speak with the youth at the youth center when they had sexist or homophobic slurs or so on. So I think sometimes it's just enough to ask, what do you mean by that? Or maybe actually say that is actually not funny. When you hear about someone give you a joke about like, okay, a man, every day he's putting hand on his woman, he gives her a slap, and she says like, why did you hit me? I haven't done anything today. And then he says, yeah, not yet, but you will later. I mean, that type of joke, I mean, that's a sexist, that violence, then we can actually afford to say like, okay, that wasn't actually funny, just to somehow point out. And I think we as group, we could do that. If one starts, then others will follow.
Go.
Okay, now my connection is gone again. Sorry.
No, thank you very much, guys. Just finally, before we kind of head over to Pat, I'd just love to kind of just know if any of you guys have come across, say, any examples of best practices or initiatives at all. I'm thinking like whether that be literally like in school curriculums and in terms of looking at gender-based violence. So whether like if you guys come across any actual practical and good pieces of practice across Europe or abroad. I know there's one example given of the Palestinian and the kind of thing in the church. But I just kind of thought I'll just give you opportunity if you guys did know any good practices at all. While you're also thinking about that, just another question I kind of just would want to kind of raise is, I guess, to what extent, in terms of like, why is it important that our policies and communities, I know we've kind of just touched upon that as well, but yeah, in terms of like, I know in terms of policy specific at all, and Jonas, in terms of your organization, like, is there any kind of specific policies that you see coming from the European Parliament or European Union at all that kind of like either fills you with hope or fills you with dread at all?
So maybe just very briefly, the EU does a lot at the moment. There is the new gender equality strategy. There is the very first LGBTIQ equality strategy. And they have lots of initiatives across the board. There's the extension of the Eurocrimes that is supposed to include hate speech and hate violence. So yes, there's a lot happening, and also to plan for impact on the ground. There's, for example, the EU dedicated that they would like do more funding for LGBTIQ organizations on the ground, stuff like that. So there is a lot to hope, and at the same time, there's also quite a bit of challenges and backlash at the moment.
Definitely. And a couple of like, I know them, like, for example, I know some member states are better than others in terms of even like acknowledging gender-based violence. And we've got one question from Sinead and McMahon. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Sinead, it's open to anyone. She asks, what is the role of men and non-binary people in reaffirming our commitments to the Istanbul Convention? So if anyone wants to answer that, but also if anyone's got any other kind of concrete or like any good practices across Europe that they'd like to share, please let's share your hand, stick your hand up. And we've also got another question, and from Myrith Bovin Died. I am sincerely apologetic in terms, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. And they ask, can you give some tips on how to make cis hetero guys in your direct circle more aware of gender norms and toxic masculinity? And okay, over to you, Alan.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
I
you.
think this is the last question is also can be connected to the practices. We have two methods that we use in our organization. We have the MVP, Mentors in Violence Prevention. That is, you can work with a small group, a classroom, a whole school, or a whole municipality on addressing gender-based violence against women, but violence in general, and also how to take active bystander moment. So when you see something is happening, how you can intervene, how you can in some way, break the what is happening, if it's racism, homophobia, etc., etc. And also we have another method that we call the Macho Factory. Macho Factory is much smaller method and easier to access. These are short clips of 3 to 5 minutes movies that addresses it displays as a situation where, for example, homophobia or transphobia or racism occurs. And the students, they watch the clip and then they can reflect on it. And then there's some steps to follow. And this is what I have used this method for more than 12 years. And it's just perfect way on how to address the issue without pointing out and say that, okay, we have some homophobia or sexism within this group. You watch the clip and then you can reflect. And then the youth and also the adults, 9 out of 10 times, they connect it to context where they ourselves have been, how they have acted or have seen other people have acted. So I think that would be a tip from me. And you can find all the information about these methods on our website, man.se, or just send me an email and I will connect you to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think that gives us, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been asking questions, everyone that's tuned in, and as well to our wonderful, amazing panelists. But we're not done yet. We've got given the space and the floor to our wonderful MEP, Pa, who will be giving us some closing statements. Over to you, Pa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Majid. And first of all, really huge thank you for everyone participating in this webinar, and including those of you who wrote down some questions also at the end. Wonderful to see and work with you again, Majid. We used to be office neighbors here in the European Parliament for a while before Brexit. You've been moderating perfectly. You have such unique energy and enthusiasm. Wonderful. And also, of course, big thank you to Alan, Jonas, and Ambid. Lots of wisdom, lots of stories from your own personal lives. And I think that is usually what is touching other people. And I've written down a few notes. Me being a meteorologist, climate expert, and usually focusing then on climate change, of course, I always try to put climate as just one part of the ecological transition needed, but also when we transfer the society into a hopefully ecologically sustainable future, we mustn't forget the social sustainability as well. And these questions that we've discussed today is, of course, a very, very basic part of creating a sustainable, socially sustainable and an equal world. But as you pointed out, it has a lot to do with norms. We need to change the norms in our society. Good that you pointed out that this isn't just about the usual gender perspective, but it's a broader content than just male versus female. And we all know that unfortunately norms usually change very slowly, but on the other hand, once we reach some sort of limit, sometimes the changes can accelerate. And also, of course, raising awareness, and not the least, as you pointed out, a few of you, that we really need education on all levels. I can give you one example from my job last year when I was working with a climate justice fund, and I pointed out that we need to have a gender perspective when it comes to climate justice. And actually, one of my colleagues from another political group, the most conservative groups, just didn't realize what I was talking about. Why should we have a gender perspective in climate justice? And when I pointed out that this is about the whole society, we need to change the whole society, he still didn't understand, basically, because he didn't want to understand, I guess. I think it was Jonas that said that we need to be bold in this transition, and I think that is something that we need to be overall in the big transition as well. We mustn't let go. We must let go of fear, and not just to get stuck in fear, and have some sort of trust that in the end, what we're standing for, what we're fighting for, is, after all, the right thing to do. And unfortunately, it will probably take a few more years, maybe even decades. But in the end, I'm certain that we will create this sustainable and equal world where hopefully then any kind of violence, whether it's gender-based or not, is no longer part of the society. To conclude, once again, really huge thank you for participating in the discussions and sharing knowledge and experience. And lastly, I also want to mention that the Greens IFA group campaign against gender-based violence, and if you're interested in this campaign, the petition, future events and actions, I really urge you to visit the Greens IFA webpage, where you can find more information. But I hope to see you again very soon, virtually or physically, and a huge thank you. And back to you again, Majid. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those parting words, And yeah, on behalf of everyone, thank you to the organizers and the tech people, everyone's at Green E for putting this together. And of course, our wonderful, amazing panelists for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts. And thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing day in, day out. That is so needed. And we're all really thankful. And hopefully next time we can do this in person. And thanks to everybody who's joined as well. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of your day, guys.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Cheers. Enjoy your summer.